So welcome everybody. I know we'll have a few other people kind of popping in, and I did get quite a few emails about people that want to see this but have a conflict. And this is, as you know, Rebecca just said it's being recorded, so we'll send this out to whoever you think might want to see it. And I have a list of about 10 people that have emailed me saying that they want the recording, so we'll send that out to them. But anyways, thank you all for joining us today. I want to introduce you to our presenters, really. I'm just kind of here maybe at the end to say a few things. But basically we have Donna and Jason here. They're on the top, well, they're on the top of my screen. I don't know where they are on your screen. But anyways, Donna and Jason are the co-founders of Pathways to Empower, and they've developed an amazing program based off of their research in education and mental health. And basically what they have done is they have developed, it's called, and I should know, I just drew a blank of what it's called, but they'll tell you what it's called on the college version. I just call it Pathways. It's always in my brain, just Pathways. But anyways, it's an amazing mental health program for college students. And I will pass along their website and their information after the presentation to everybody that attends and everybody on my list. But the reason I invited them here today is that we want to implement, or I have implemented their Pathways, their Thrive program into my classroom. So we've done about 50 students or so, 45, 50 students that have gone through the program, and the feedback has been amazing, absolutely amazing. And so I found that it was super important to get it out to you, because our end goal is really to get this program into the hands of every single SUNY student, not just SUNY Oswego, but every single SUNY student, and then develop a new common language, which Donna is probably going to talk about, this new common language. So without further ado, I want to send it over to Donna and Jason, and I think both of you guys should have access to sharing your screen. So whoever wants to run the show, go for it. And I will see if I can monitor the chat box. If anybody has any questions, pop in the chat and we'll go from there at the end. All right, the show's yours.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. So the program that we have is called Thriving Through College. As Amy said, our company is called Pathways to Empower. Dr. Donna Volpitta and myself, I'm Jason. So we're going to get into that and kind of go through what it is. We're going to keep it moving. We'll leave time for questions if people have it at the end, because if 2020 has taught us anything, it's that life is too short for bad Zooms. So here we go.
So I am Donna, Donna Volpitta. I'm an educator by trade. I've been an educator for many years. I've worked with students from kindergarten through graduate school, mostly focused on students with learning attention and emotional issues. I went back to get my doctoral degree in learning disabilities. And when I graduated, my third child was 3 days old. So, you can picture the graduation with the baby and the Bjorn, making sure that I had the baby 3 days ahead of time. I had the spiciest food possible so that I could make it to my graduation. So when I graduated, I became really interested in using what I had learned in my program in order to help my kids. At first, it was focused on learn social language, because I studied a lot of Vygotsky, and that turned into building resilience. And I wrote a parenting book. I had a fourth child, so now I have 4 teenagers. And I wrote a parenting book called The Resilience Formula, a guide to proactive, not reactive parenting, based on sort of those theories and using my kids as guinea pigs. And then I became really interested in the brain science. I realized that as an educator, I did not know much about the brain. And as I was thinking about resilience, I thought it's really important for us to understand how the brain works. So I did a lot of studying on my own, a lot of talking to neuroscientists, a lot of reading, and went to develop a model to help people understand the brain's response to challenge. At the time, my youngest was 6, so I wanted it to be easy enough for a 6-year-old to understand, but able to apply to any challenge from the playground to the boardroom. It's called the Resilient Mindset Model, and we're going to go over that today. And that's sort of the foundation of the program. And about a year and a half ago, I met Jason, and I'll let him take it from here for the rest of the story.
Yeah, really quick. We met about a year and a half ago. I was the chief product officer of another company, and a technology company, and Donna came on our podcast. She explained the model in about a half hour. She went through some real world examples. I felt like I walked away from that podcast knowing way more, not only about my brain, but also how to parent my children and help them as they developed. So it was kind of a light bulb moment for me. We kept talking after that happened. And in January of 2020, we started Pathways to Empower to really take what Donna had been teaching for the last decade and turning it into things that we could get out to as many people as possible in an engaging way.
So one of the things I've been teaching the model over the past 10 years, mostly going to conferences, talking to individual schools, educators, parents. And one of the things that I really thought about was the barriers to success. We were raising our children, and interestingly enough, most of you have probably seen The Race to Nowhere, which was the movie that came out, believe it or not, 10 years ago, talking about how we're preparing our kids for college in a lot of the wrong ways, and that we're seeing the results of that now, and we're seeing barriers to success. So Jason and I talked about what are the barriers to success in college. The first one is inadequate life skills. We're teaching, often parents are becoming their kids' prefrontal cortex, that as they're raising kids, they're disabling them in a lot of ways, that as we try to shelter them from challenges, we're not teaching kids the life skills that they need, the decision-making, the communication, the leadership skills, and being able to make balanced choices. So we're not teaching them those life skills that they need to survive in college. The second is issues of mental health. We're seeing anxiety, depression, suicide rates skyrocket. And so kids need to understand how to take care of their mental health. And that really comes down to how are they fostering brain health? We need to begin to teach them how to do that. And lastly, lack of resilience. We're hearing from so many college educators that students are coming unable to handle challenges. And this goes back to the parents being their kids' prefrontal cortex, that they're sheltering them from making those small decisions and responding to those small challenges. And what happens with that is that they don't have that ability to handle those larger challenges once they hit college.
So our programs are all brain-based. We, as you can probably imagine, that is the thing that is most interesting to us, and it gives us the ability to reach people in a way that is very non-judgmental. We want to provide something that's easy to understand, which is pretty much from go. When I met Donna, I realized she's a translator. So I have a psychology degree and realized really quickly that neuroscience can be very dense, but it's massively important to understanding why we react and why we sometimes act the way that we do. So she makes that really easy to understand. We've been able to utilize that with great success. We also have a lot of tools and strategies. So we're giving application throughout. So it's education, reflect, apply. That's kind of the process that we go through. And by the end of it, everyone has a common language where they can discuss really difficult topics with a unified language. And that works best when whole communities have it. So everyone can kind of be on the same page. They can understand it. They're not thinking about it through the judgmental side that we often bring to the table whether it's stigma around mental health or feeling like you're doing something wrong. We're giving them a scientific understanding and basis so that they can speak in the same way and really understand each other.
So I want to now give you a little bit of an idea. We're saying that we're teaching the brain. We're saying we're making it really easy to understand. We want to give you a background to see what exactly in the Thriving Through College course, what are we teaching? And the foundation is the brain science. So we start with giving kind of brain science 101. we talk about the brain development, and we do it in ways that are very easy to understand. We use a lot of metaphors. So when we're talking about brain science and the brain development, we talk about the childhood brain and how we're developing brain pathways when we're learning. So as we have experiences, our neurons fire and we create pathways. We say the brain is kind of like a jungle, and we're creating pathways through that jungle, through repeatedly firing those neurons in the brain. We talk about the neurochemicals, and we say that they're like little text messages that drive our behavior. So text messages to the brain. So we have dopamine that says, wow, that feels good, let's do it again. We have oxytocin that says, wow, we're loved, or serotonin that says, wow, you're really good at that. So giving them that understanding of how they're getting those neurochemicals and how important that is for healthy brain development. We also talk about the adolescent brain and the two jobs of pruning and paving, pruning away those neurons that we don't need and paving the neuropathways that we have developed so that those signals travel faster. So we go through that in a way that's really easy to understand. We also talk about the 4 R's, which are the 4 systems that are so critical for students to develop in adolescence. That we talk about that these are the things that are really what will have them succeed as they head to college and then as they head into adulthood. So the first one is their system of reward. Where are they getting that dopamine? Are they learning to make healthy choices about the dopamine that they get? Are they getting it in those really quick ways? Are they learning how to get that through studying really hard towards getting a good grade on the test? How are they getting that dopamine? They need to understand that system of reward. Second is regulation. How are they developing their prefrontal cortex? As I said, those executive functions are so critical for them to be able to self-regulate and make healthy choices. And often, if they haven't developed those pathways, they're not able to make those choices. So helping them to self-regulate. The next is relationships. We know that our support systems are so critical in the decisions that we make, and helping to guide them in how they're getting that oxytocin. How are they finding those relationships? How are they making, building those relationships with their parents to become more independent? And finally, resilience. How are they responding to challenge? How are they able to respond to the things that come up? Do they have the system in place to be able to do that in healthy ways? Then we also go through the resilient mindset model. As you can see, it's based on these 4 characters. They're kind of cartoons. And I know that when people first see it, they often think, oh, this is for little kids. And it is a way that we can explain this to really young kids. Jason has explained it to his 5-year-old, and kids do understand it. But it's also relatable. I've done presentations for corporate executives, and everybody relates to these characters. They're really fun, and they're used in a way that people can relate to them. So there are 3 parts of the model. The first is the 4S framework, that we say our resilience is our response to any challenge, good, bad, big, or small. And that response is guided by the brain pathways that we've formed around these 4 S's. Self, who are we? What do we stand for? Situation, how do we put that challenge into perspective and break it down into its doable parts? Supports, who and what do we go to ask for help? And strategies, what are the things that we actually do to handle that challenge? And the reality of those 4 S's is really irrelevant. It's the brain pathways that we have around them that guide our decisions. So I could have a lot of supports, but if I don't know that I have those supports, or I don't think I have those supports, I won't use them. So they're irrelevant. The great part is that these 4 S's can be used as a framework to prepare for, handle, and reflect on any challenge, whether that's academic in the classroom, whether it's in the dorm, whether it's, wherever we are. As parents, as educators, as people, we can use these challenges to actively create more resilient brain pathways. The other thing about that is that it's a great way to build a growth mindset, that looking at challenges and using these 4 S's really build a growth mindset as well. The second part of the model is the 4 characters of the brain. We think of decisions that we make as good versus bad, but to the brain, there is no good or bad. The brain makes decisions based on long-term versus short-term. And that's based on a book called Out of Character by David DeSteno. He's a psychologist out of Boston, and he puts people into moral dilemmas and sees how they respond. And he wrote this book and said, it's not about an angel and a devil, good versus bad. It's about an ant versus the grasshopper. So there's part of our brain that's in charge of our long-term decisions. That's the cortex. And the ant represents the cortex. And he's in charge of the long-term decisions, like putting money in the bank, going to the doctor, all the things that studying for the test, the things that are going to benefit us in the long term. He also holds the tools of a healthy brain. When we have these in place, we're better able to make those long-term decisions. We all know that when we're overtired, we don't kind of make those the best choices. So we have to think about those tools and make sure our students know that they make a healthy brain. The second character is the grasshopper. He represents the limbic system, which is the emotional part of our brain, and he's in charge of the here and now. He doesn't really care if we do well on the test. He really is in charge of the short-term decisions, the here and now. He kind of wants to, order a pizza and eat and watch Netflix all night. He's also, the fun part of the brain. When we're having a good time, that's the limbic system, and that's important for a healthy brain. It's about balance between the ant and the grasshopper. The grasshopper is also in charge of fight, flight, or freeze. The main job of our brain is to survive, is to respond to threat. That's the number one job, and that's the grasshopper's job. He's in charge of fight, flight, or freeze, getting us out of the way of that oncoming car. He's also where we get a lot of those neurochemicals, that oxytocin, that dopamine, that serotonin, the things that drive our behavior. So I always say that last version of the grasshopper with his arms up in the air represent the fact that self-esteem isn't a gift we can give our kids. It's a neurochemical response we rob them of when we don't let them struggle. The third character is the glowworm. As I said, the main job of the brain is survival. So we have the amygdala, which is always in charge of looking out for threat. So the glowworm looks out for threat. When we're stressed out, when we have a lot of little challenges and we're in that stress mode, sometimes she can get to that middle mode where she can go red alert even when we're not facing a real threat. So we have to watch out for that. But when the glowworm sees a threat to survival, like a car coming at us, it's the glowworm's job to go red alert and call out the grasshopper for fight, flight, or freeze, which gets us out of the way of that oncoming car. So there's the glowworm in red alert, calling out the grasshopper, fight, flight, or freeze for the oncoming car. What a lot of people don't know is that the glowworm also responds in the same way to social threats and rewards. So our brain doesn't distinguish between physical threats like a car coming at us and social threats. So REACTS is an acronym for the social threats and rewards to the brain: respect, equity, alliances, control, territory, and similarity. So when any of those are threatened, the glowworm also goes red alert and calls out the grasshopper for fight, flight, or freeze. Sometimes we do and say things we don't really mean. The dragonfly's job is override. It's mindfulness. It's understanding when we need to say, nope, we got this. We don't need to go fight, flight, or freeze. We have these 4 S's in place. We know how to handle this situation. My favorite story of the dragonfly is when my youngest was 6 years old. He was really mad at me. I was really mad at him. And when I went to talk to him, he said, Mom, I can't talk to you. I'm in grasshopper mode. And that was so powerful because he had the language to talk to me. He had the strategy. He knew that he was going to say and do something that he didn't mean if we had that conversation. And that is incredibly powerful, having that language that is non-judgmental to talk about the brain science.
So with that model in mind, that is really the basis, those 3 sections you just looked at, the basis for how the program is structured, how Thriving Through College is structured. And we really wanted to make sure that we were touching on kind of the most impactful aspects of what makes a student successful. I know student success is a term that is thrown around a lot lately, and I know it's more important than ever. But when we think about creating kind of the purpose of education, the purpose of going through this process, reaching 22 to 26 years old, is that you are developing your brain. It's a critical aspect of the adolescent brain development. And when you come out of that, you want to have the ability to be a successful adult in the real world. So that's how the program is structured. The first aspect of that, when we're thinking about these kind of pillars of student success, is wellness. Clearly, as Donna mentioned when she was discussing the ANT tools, wellness is an issue right now. Physical wellness, but also mental wellness is a huge issue for college students right now, specifically after this past year. There are a lot of people dealing with things that maybe they weren't anticipating. They feel a lack of control, and we want to make sure that we're giving them tools and strategies to gain that control back, which is the best way to reduce anxiety, which is the #1 issue right now, and give those students the sense that they do have the ability to impact their wellness in a positive way.
The second area that we like to apply this to is restorative justice. We talk to higher ed people, and they talk about how frustrating it is that so much of their discipline tends to be punitive rather than educational. And being able to have discussions with students around how their brains work, a lot of the discipline issues are grasshopper decisions. They're short term. They're decisions that students are making because their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. So we need to help them to develop that and learn how to build up those 4 S's in order to make better decisions, make decisions that are better for them in the long term. So this program offers the opportunity to have that common language about the decisions that students are making and try to turn that from punitive to educational.
Finally, diversity, equity, inclusion. Increasingly, the populations of college campuses are changing, and you have people coming from all different backgrounds, and it's very important for them to be able to communicate in a uniform way, be able to have conversations that are difficult and uncomfortable, and then progress through those conversations. So we want to help. One of the big things is reacts and thinking about the social threats and looking at DEI programming through that lens, so that when people come in with a scientific background, it's a non-judgmental way of seeing issues and seeing differences and then working through them empathetically, so that we can have better conversations that propel diversity, equity, and inclusion programs forward and really help to make, again, as we said, adults that are going to go into the real world and be good citizens and be people that are going to solve major issues. So one of the things about our program that's different than a lot of online programming, we did a lot of research to develop the delivery of the content. And what we continuously heard was that for the most part, online courses are not very good. There's a lot of talking head courses where it's kind of single camera and it's a long period of listening. And you don't get that same, while that might work in a lecture hall to some extent, it doesn't have that interactivity when it's happening on a screen, and people get very fatigued very quickly. We also know that through the neuroscience of attention. So we wanted to make all of our videos, we broke it up into these very short bite-sized chunks of information. So while in this presentation, we've done it over the course of, maybe this will be 30 minutes in total, and 15 of it was that conversation what Donna was talking about, that would be broken up into about 40 videos. So that would be something that they could walk away from every single one and say, okay, I got a little bit of information, and then we prompt them with reflections and real world activities. In fact, only about 30% of the course is the videos. The bulk of the course is their reflection, guided reflections. And another thing that we came back to was we consulted with both people in Hollywood production and people that do YouTube videos. And the common thread that we found was that students are increasingly going to YouTube as an educational supplement to what they're learning in school. And the reason that they do that is because YouTube, the way it works, is those creators, those educational creators, which are the most engaging creators on the platform and are driving the platform forward, they only make money if people keep watching. And if people stay through and watch all the ads that are on the video, or people finish the video, that's how they get populated to the top of the list. That's how the algorithm works there. And what's happening is that what they're doing is, by virtue of that necessity on their part, they are creating the most engaging content that they can possibly create. It's highly visual. There are lots of camera cuts, different things like that. So we've developed a program to look like that style, give a lot of internal feedback and reflection, as we said, but also the actual videos themselves are done in a style that you could say is a YouTube style video.
And this is a quotation from one of the students who actually took the Thrive program. I really liked the Thrive program. It was delivered in bite-sized chunks that made the information easy to take in and learn. Everything was applicable and relatable to real life. I'm so glad to have the bug references to use every day. And this sort of reflects back what we're talking about in terms of the style of delivery. This works for kids. As I said, I have 4 teenagers, 13 to 19. Actually, it's my son's 19th birthday today. So we asked them for feedback, and they all came back with that this is what is critical in terms of getting kids to getting students, young adults, to actually watch the videos and engage with them. YouTube is really powerful, and there's a reason for that. Cartoons are really popular. There's a reason for that. We relate to it. So it's not only the content, but the delivery that is critical in terms of how we can use the Thrive program.
So yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We have, I think Amy had mentioned it too. We wanted to leave some time for questions if you have them. Obviously, if you think of anything, you want to email us. If you want to go deeper on any of the topics we discussed, we're always happy to talk. And our website, www.pathways2empower.com, is another resource you can look at. We have a lot of free content on there as well. So I think with that, we'll kind of turn it over to Amy. We really appreciate the time and people listening to what we have to say.
Thank you, Donna and Jason. That was great. And I wanted to also kind of pipe in mainly because my experience with Donna and Jason thus far, I met them through somebody in School of Ed. One of the chairs in School of Ed saw Donna's presentation at a conference. I think this was last winter. So this was when they were actually having face-to-face conferences. So obviously pre-COVID, which I can't even remember, but and she came back to a chairs meeting and said, we were talking about mental health with students, and she's like, you need to contact Donna. She has this program, blah, 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 blah. So anyways, we chatted for quite a while, off and on. And, I was kind of hung up at first about the cartoon characters with the college students. I was worried about that, but I got over it because I guess I realized I never liked cartoons, even when I was 5 years old. So I guess I'm just not a cartoon person, but either way, I just found the content and their personalities so empowering that I just embraced it. And so what we did this past fall, after getting IRB approval and so forth, we decided to give it to the students. And the program, I mean, I can't stress enough the response that I got. And I know they provided the one quote, but I think we have 45 or 50 students that took it. And I did my own evaluation of the program. And out of all of them, I would say 97% of the comments that I got were, it's amazing. I learned so much about this. I wish I knew this information earlier. You know how it is when you get course evaluations, that there's always the negative feedback, but even their negative ones were not negative in my book. It was like, one was, well, I already knew this information. Well, I know the person, and she specifically said how she knew it. She took an emotional wellness class. So obviously, and it's only a few people that take that class. And so clearly she knew that information. Something else that was negative was something about the PDF reflections. Again, easy fix, nothing that Jason or Donna weren't willing to work with. But when I say I can't stress enough the information and the feedback that they got from it, one of the things that was said, a couple things that were said, is that they really appreciated the cartoon characters. And again, I think this alludes to what Jason and Donna said about how kids these days, you know, that's what they're seeing. They're seeing these adult movies as, but they're cartoon characters, you know, the animated movies, that's what they're doing. And I specifically asked my class, because we talked about it. I specifically said, you know, what are your thoughts on that? And they were like, I loved it because it gave us something simple and easy to remember, right? So that was one thing that they really, really liked. The other part about it, and Jason mentioned it, which is these short YouTube-like clips. And the clips are really, and Jason, I don't know if you have, or while I'm talking, if you could pull one up that's kind of short, just to show as an example, but it's Jason talking, and then he goes into like these figures. And again, I know Jason has mentioned that has a friend in Hollywood that really helped him kind of formulate how to do that to keep students' attention. But the feedback that I got from the students was that they were able to maintain their attention. And I know I gave the assignment over winter break or over Thanksgiving break. And I think Donna and Jason had said it takes about 2.5 to 3 hours, you know, to complete it. And I gave them like 2 weeks to do it. And almost all of them said that they just sat and did it because they were so engaged with it, which I really thought was interesting, although I would have preferred them to spread it out. But the way it works is that Jason would give his spiel for a couple of minutes and show these flashing figures. And then there's a point at which they pull out a reflection notebook with prompts on it. And they reflect back and they basically complete these reflections. And that is the part I feel like is so powerful, is the fact that it's not just content being delivered, but it's reinforcing the content. And it's reinforcing it in a super cool way. So Jason, I don't know, do you have a clip that you can show us that's kind of short? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, that's all right. I'm just pulling it up. It'll be like, I just got to get into the back.
Yeah, you're good. So basically, as Jason's pulling that up, basically you've got these reflection, it's a PDF, but I know that the second part of the program, they've basically embedded the reflection questions right in. But that was the part that the students really enjoyed, was this ability to go and listen to the content, and then they take a break and they reflect on the assignment by responding to these questions in their own private notebook. They're not turning anything in. And one of my fears was like, okay, how do I know the students actually did it? But I mean, you could create that as an assignment. But what I would like to do is actually, if we can implement it into different classes, they do a specific content, you know, a section. And then within that, after that section's over, we can reflect as a group of how that went. Ready, Jason?
Yep. I'm just going to share, make sure the sound is working.
Yeah, sorry, I put you on the spot on that one.
No worries. Oh.
There you are.
Okay. I believe I'm sharing sound too. Let's see. It's a great, I got paused at a great moment there. One of the best ways to prevent mental illness
Perfect.
is to engage in activities that actively promote brain health. Now, that may seem obvious, but it's a really important way that we set ourselves up for success. In this activity coming up, you're going to go over this list of protective factors and work on ways that you can incorporate them into your daily life. A lot of them are really easy. They're small changes you can make, and the best way to improve in life is small incremental changes over time.
You know, after watching that, this is the first time I noticed that your water bottle is strategically placed in front of the emblem of your computer. Did you do that purposely?
Yes, that I learned that. I learned that early on in my. You got to hide logos wherever.
I didn't even notice that. But see, they're short and sweet. And then what would happen? The student, again, it's an online platform. The student would then be prompted to create a reflection or discuss that. And I don't know what the particular discussion was at that point, but I assume it had something to do with goal setting. I don't know if you know off the top of your head.
Yeah, I thought that's the one you were talking about when you were describing it. So that one kind of sets up a reflection about protective factors, ways to promote, kind of prevent mental illness from creeping in, or just keep yourself in a mentally well state. So talking about the things that protect the brain naturally. And they get a list. The reason why that video is really short is they get a list of, all of the protective factors that are kind of agreed upon by the psychology community, and then how they can actually implement them. The reflection of that one specifically is to think about the ones that they're doing, think about the ones that they might be missing, and then create a plan for how they can continually improve on those, not in a day, but over, kind of like the end of that clip says, short incremental improvements over time, not try to do it all. It's kind of like when you start a diet in January and then you fizzle out on like January 5th. The reason is usually because you tried to do way too much at once. So giving just little tiny bites and creating that plan is also an exercise in mindfulness. So it kind of serves two masters in that specific video. But yeah, that's 37 seconds is, I would say, on the short end of the clips, but the longest one I believe is 2 minutes for any of the individual kind of chunks of information.
And again, that's the really, really cool part is it's the handout or the reflections that they have with this whole program. So it's not just listening. They have a guide. It's a guide actually that they're following along with. And what the cool thing is that I would like to use within the classroom is they listen to these particular, I mean, you could almost look at it as, and I just drew a blank of what, it's called when you're the teaching method of having them do all the kind of listening and reading outside of class and then the real stuff in class. It's flipped classroom. Oh my gosh. Anyways, wow. I've only been hearing that word for a bazillion years, but anyways, I think it's a really great way. Thank you, Rebecca. It's a really great way to use the flipped classroom because it talks, the students can listen to the modules themselves and discuss, answer their books, and then come to the classroom and you can actually do breakout sessions if it's online or face-to-face in the groups, small groups. That's kind of how we used it, where they would discuss their answers and then reflect on what they learned from each other. And I really think, it can be its own standalone program, but I think to incorporate it into something where there's this common language that we're constantly referring back to is huge.
Amy, can I also mention that the student courses also come with parent webinars?
Yes.
And that we have courses for educators and we have courses for parents as well. So that I think that common language and I know that one of the pain points of a lot of educators is that parents don't understand how they're disabling their kids. They're doing it for the best of intentions, but explaining that brain science, I can't tell you the responses that I get when I talk about self-esteem isn't a gift that you can give your kids. It's a neurochemical response you rob them of. And helping parents to understand how to scaffold, how to guide, how to help their students to become more independent is a critical piece as well. And when we have that common language, it can be very powerful.
I agree. And again, the students, they were using, Grasshopper and all these different terminologies, and I was kind of laughing, and they really did appreciate that. And then as far as diversity, equity, and inclusion, I really think it allows us to have that platform to be able to discuss have those difficult conversations with students, but in a very respectful manner, because they know why their brain is acting the way it's acting, essentially, instead of someone just telling them. And I think that helps a lot. What else? I wrote down some counts of things.
That also goes back to just empathy in general. Empathy can be learned, and we can improve on it. I think one of the big, I'm involved with at my children's school, the Council for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here. And one of the things that they consistently come back to is how do we draw more people into the conversation that are scared to be part of it, which is something that they've kind of consistently spoken to me about, in terms of this conversation only really works if everyone's part of it so that they're understanding how to move forward.
Exactly. So with that being said, we wanted to leave the last 10 minutes or so to have a discussion to get some ideas, what you think, what everyone thinks about it, what your thoughts are, if we could incorporate this into the classroom, or even we have had discussions about incorporating it into orientation or prior to the students coming to college. But we really feel like the students need this common language and need this material at the start of their college careers to be able to then implement it moving forward. So what's everybody's thoughts? What are you guys thinking? I feel like I'm talking to my students. Come on, Michael, I know being a psychiatrist or psychologist or counselor or whatever you are, what's your thoughts? I mean, I know you haven't gotten into a lot of the material, but I think the student that said they already had this material was quoting your emotional wellness class. And so I'd love to hear your take on things.
Yeah, so Jason and Donna, just so you know, I'm a licensed mental health counselor.
Thank you.
Here in New York State. So I'm a therapist. And, it was interesting when, I started watching, and you're saying we're doing a lot of the brain research. I mean, probably over the last 15 years or so, that's what I'm constantly looking at the brain stuff. And it's so fascinating. And as technology has really kind of caught up, and it has really helped us understand the brain so much more. I like the analogies, and how do we, I'd like to be able to really kind of see more of it. So I know, because it's like just even the short pieces, I'm like, oh, this sounds like what I teach in my emotional wellness class. And some of it too is I also teach a stress class. So again, right? So I break down the brain, the amygdala, the limbic system, all of that. So, but it's interesting, Amy, because you're talking about, the cartoon piece. Even as an adult, I still can connect to those.
Yeah, I guess I'm the only one in the world that just is like, I guess I'm too like, I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the metaphors or the analogies, like it. Plus, too, when you're talking about some of the brain stuff, anytime you had a visual to help you remember a concept, it's like it works better, and people are then much more likely to engage in whatever it is that we're asking them to do. So, and then the only other thing is like, I don't, like, how deep do you go into like habits and habit forming and rituals, and because that's the other thing that, like, for a number of years I've been studying now.
Yeah, so we talk a lot in the course. So think of this course as like a more broad overview of trying to understand the processes themselves, what's happening in the brain. It's broken into 4 modules. So it's kind of what's happening in the brain, like a Brain Science 101 course, kind of the things that you need for healthy development. Then it gets then it's the resilient mindset model and kind of ways to build resilience. Then it's how you kind of get into creating better habits in your life. Like what are the things that are going to impede that process or assist it? And then finally, it's mental health literacy. It's talking about trauma and like trauma-informed decision-making, understanding like how that's affecting you, the different types of trauma, and also what some of the mental illnesses is. So at the end of the course, it's the last piece of the course is actually the final video is talking about how to seek help if this isn't working, kind of thing. So it's really broad. It works through, like I said, 40 videos. So a lot of concepts are covered, but it kind of works through in those 4 modules that way.
I have a question.
Go
ahead. I teach 101, English 101, and my students, some of them really struggle. They become overwhelmed quickly. They tend to shut down and give up. I'm just wondering how this might help them.
I think that this can be applied anywhere. This can be applied in the classroom, and talking about, okay, and we talk in the parent and educator courses a lot about scaffolding in terms of using those 4 S's and saying, this is what's happening. You're shutting down because you don't have a strategy. You don't have those 4 S's. So let's talk through, is there a support that you can go to? Is there a strategy? Is your strategy working right now? Taking those little steps. Unfortunately, some of the students have not used those small challenges to build up those 4 S's. So we need to go back and support them and talk through that with them and give them ideas of strategies that they can use in order to start. For English, it might be, okay, let's talk about an outline. Some of them may not have that as a framework, and that's the building foundation for writing the essay, right? Is having that ability to do the structured outline. If they don't have that in place, how can we give them those strategies? The small steps, and helping them understand, your brain is responding in fight, flight, or freeze. They're freezing. And I like to say that violence, anxiety, and depression roughly translate to fight, flight, or freeze. And so that's our brain's natural response to challenge. So the override there is having those 4 S's. So the opposite of anxiety and depression, or that freeze, is action, is knowing what to do. When we have a sense of control, when we have a sense that we can handle this, we're able to override that better.
And that's another, goes back to some misconceptions too that people have, whether it's, Hollywoodized versions of depression or happiness, and people often pit those 2 against each other. I think that's been a really, as we've been presenting this an incredible amount. the thing that people keep coming back to, that line right there, the opposite of anxiety and depression is action, really changes how people think about what they need to do. Because it gives, happiness is not, it's like, what is happy? If you're depressed, that's not helpful. So the opposite is not happiness. So that's been big for me personally too. Just understanding that and reminding myself. And that kind of goes back to, again, the power of education, right? So when you're educated about a topic, you just have way more in your toolkit to start addressing things.
And yeah, the way we want to use it at Oswego and moving on into SUNY is, again, the students are given this information, either it be at the start of the semester, their first year, or during the summer, or whatever it is, and all faculty have that common language. And now when you are experiencing the student or these students that are really struggling, you have that common language to go back and say, whatever it is that the student's struggling with it, and they'll know ways to handle that. Another thing that we're looking to do to incorporate is some coaching with the program. So what would happen would be, instead of the professor, obviously we want the professor, the instructor of the class, to have that common knowledge, but also to say, why don't you join this coaching class, this group that meets on 4 p.m. on Tuesdays in such and such room, and they're going to talk about the resiliency model, or different ways that you can improve in your classroom, in the classroom, based off of this model. And so that's what we're seeking out some grant funding right now to incorporate this idea that everybody is going to have this common language. But then there's also these resources when the instructor doesn't have necessarily the time to continue with it, to send them out, instead of going to the counseling center, to send them to these coaching resources. So, and I like the fact that Michael kept shaking his head yes, because again, I tend to I go to Michael, he's a VP in our department, and he teaches the drug and emotional wellness classes. And he's always the person I go to when I have some sort of question about, mental health. And so it's good to see that Michael is on the same page as you guys. Not that I was worried, but as we start to wrap things up, because I know that Rebecca's going to cut us off in a second. Any other comments or questions? Well, Jason and Donna, I can't thank you enough for joining us. Again, I have a list of about 10 people that are going to want the recording, so I'll share that with them. So we may get some follow-up questions with that. But again, thank you so much. And also Naja Zaid, she's one of our faculty. She just put in the chat, thank you. But I also wanted to state that she is also a mental health counselor, I believe, by trade, and I'll be looking at Naja for some feedback. And it looks like Magdalena, you have a question as well. So Magdalena, what's your question? Where are you here? Oh, there you are. What is the timeline that you're looking to introduce this? So good question. Basically, what we're going to do is try to get it into as many hands as we can in the spring. And so we're going to continue to pilot it because I do want to run some statistics on the data that we have. The data, again, has been enormous. I'd like to get another 100 people or so through it. I do ask if anybody on this call is interested in me or us implementing it in your classroom. It's literally just a link we share with you. The students go on to that link and then they complete the program. You can incorporate into your classroom, or you can just incorporate it as curriculum, essentially curriculum that you are now given that takes up about 3 hours of your classroom time, which is good. So if you're interested in using it, please do so for the spring. Just contact me and we'll talk to Jason and Donna. We're looking for grants because we do want to get it into the first year courses, all first year courses. We need to pay for the program, and we'd like to pay for some coaching to go along with that. And we're looking for that to happen by fall. And then our goal is SUNY-wide. Their goal, I'm just here as a facilitator, watching it all grow. So, all right, thank you, everybody. I know we're out of time, so if you do have any questions, just let me know. Please join their website, check out their website, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much. Yeah, we
Thank
appreciate
you.
the time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.